Hey there, welcome back. It's Louisa Munson from Feel Good Astrology, and I got a question earlier this week, just a couple of days ago, I think, maybe even yesterday, and I have to say it took my breath away a little bit. I found it a little shocking, which is kind of unsurprising, really, because the question is surrounding Uranus, and it's quite a hot topic, and it's one that gets people really hot under the collar for a whole variety of reasons and experiences. So I'm going to have a look at this question. And it's with some trepidation that I do it, I have to say, and I've got some real reasons why. First of all, let me just bring on the question. So somebody, I need glasses to be able to read what their name is. Japjit Core 4634 asked me, hey, is it true that you'll have autistic children with a fifth house Uranus? And they'd been listening to my Uranus in the fifth house. Pretty sure I didn't say it in that podcast. And it brought up a whole heap of emotions and reactions in me, I have to say. And initially I thought, oh, crikey, I'm not going to deal with that because I could get a lot of backlash for this. However, I do have an interest in it, and it's a very valid question. And I do think there's a lot of old astrological BS that a lot of people swallow. There's a lot of very fatalistic astrologers out there that say, oh, if you've got this sign, this means. And I actually want to make it my mission to kind of counter that. You know, I think astrology is a tool that we can use to give us choice and freedom and to really help us. And I sometimes find, you know, when somebody has said something like that, and then lots of people start believing it, I can see that it's actually quite disempowering. Or can be disempowering, depending on your set point. But anyway, before we get going, I just want to say, set some, not ground rules, but a little bit of context around why I've got a little bit of hesitancy to answer this, but why I also think it's important. So the first thing I ask myself is, am I qualified to answer this question? Well, it just so happens I used to volunteer at a charity in the UK for 6 years. I was living there, on site there. It was the largest disability charity in the UK at the time, and it specialised in creating opportunities for young adults with additional needs. My husband was working there. He was a paid employee, and he had a project where he worked with children with a range of additional needs, mostly on the autistic spectrum, and he was running a radio show. He set one up to help them learn how to broadcast and give them a voice, and to be able to empower them. So and also to support the families. So I got to know a lot of mums and parents of and dads, sorry, I should say mums and dads, or parents collectively, of young adults who have an additional need or something on the autistic spectrum, etc., etc. So I'm not exactly qualified because I don't have a child myself. I'm not one of these mums. However, I know lots and lots, and I've heard their stories and sat at dinner tables with them, spent a lot of time with them. So, and it was my absolute pleasure to do that. My second thing is, you know, people talk about there being an autistic spectrum. And first of all, I would say, how do you medically know if somebody's on a spectrum? And so I know there are these tests, like questionnaires and interview process, and there are a series of different steps that a doctor or psychologist can go through with a family and you know, a member of their family to assess whether somebody is on a spectrum or not. Now, one of the things that I do wonder is, how useful is that information? You know, you might find you're slightly on the spectrum, and there are some people that say we're all on that spectrum, that there are gradations of being on that spectrum. And I'm guessing it's very, very helpful for people who are really at the top end, because it can give people options as to how they might support their children into adulthood, and to work through maybe what expectations they can have for living and stuff. So yes, I see it's a spectrum, but like from an astrological perspective, and I'm pretty sure, and in fact, I'm going to say outright, no, Uranus is not in the fifth house of everyone's chart where somebody has a child with autism. Absolutely not. And I'm going to take some time to demonstrate this. I do have one example actually that does, but I have loads that don't. But if there is a spectrum, what's the cutoff point where astrologically would say, oh, they're autistic enough to have that Uranus in the 5th house? You know, you just can't judge that. So that's a bit of semantics. Also, I would say it's a bombshell question. Having been in that environment for 6 years, I know that there are loads of linguistic, medical, and possibly funding politics that affects and determines how you are talking about individuals with autism. So, for instance, there are many people that say autism is just a natural part of being human. And so if you're talking about diagnosis and whether somebody's autistic and you're talking about the condition, you're pointing out more, you're creating more separation by having those definitions. But I also understand that for many people, you know, it might appear frightening and confusing if you're in the situation, or if you're planning on getting pregnant and you've got Uranus in your 5th house. I really want to reassure you, as I do this video. Also, there is a lot of speculation about origins of autism. Now, the charity that I worked for was very much of the belief system that it's a very natural part of being a human. That said, I also met lots of mums during that time that mentioned that they thought that their children had been affected by a certain procedure, and that their symptoms started thereafter. Now, there are lots of people that will say backwards and forwards, no, that's impossible, that can never happen. And a certain doctor who made those claims initially has been discounted, etc. I think we also need to consider the amount of funding that goes into to manage this whole narrative. And I have to say, as one mum, I think we should trust what mums say. If a mum is saying, this is my experience, I know mums who know their children were born and they appear different right from word go to their other children. And I know some mums who have the opposite experience. And so I firmly believe that I'm here to represent all of the mums in this video. I'm not selling one side or another. My interest in doing this is to answer the question, you know, if you have Uranus in the 5th house, you know, is that a sign of an autistic child? I'm expanding it as a question, really, to say, what are the markers of a parent who maybe has an autistic child? And what I think you'll find is there are really no markers, but there are a couple of patterns that show up. And so I will share those with you. And obviously, this is a very small subset. So I've looked at the charts of 2 very famous people who famously have autistic children. So Jon Travolta and who's the other one? Jenny McCarthy. And I've also got the three charts of parents who have autism within their families. So I'm going to just kind of say it like that, really. There's one other thing that I would say, and this is really down here, that what I notice in these charts is what's coming up in the astrological patterns really says more about the parents' reaction to the diagnosis or the idea of the diagnosis. Are they comfortable with it, and how does it enhance life? So even if you did have some of these markers, I would also still say what is shown up is how you are dealing with your life and how you are dealing with your family in the shape that it is in. So again, you know, some people might have all the markers, but for them, you know, their whole family is a joy. And so it hasn't disrupted their life. And for other people, I know it can be a struggle for a lot of families. And I know that there's a very high incidence of parents are raising neurodivergent children on their own because it's put pressure on their relationship. So, you know, there's a whole heap of factors that goes into this. So I just wanted to clear that off right from where go. Now, I just want to do an astrological clearing. So my immediate thoughts to this question, first of all, Uranus isn't just about autism. And I would say it's not about autism. It is about a quality of consciousness. You know, every planet represents an energetic, and the Uranus energetic is of consciousness, shock, change, brilliance, surprises, innovation. It's very much about being different, being like having your own rhythm, being absolutely original and off the wall and independent. And in fact, like if you were raised in quite a wealthy family and you were that creative, off the wall person, you might not have got tested for autism anyway. You might have just been, oh, that's the eccentric one that we've got in our family. You know, there's always a black sheep, or there's always an eccentric person. There's always a slightly more creative person. There's always the person that's got their head in the clouds. And in fact, if it was a huge conversation when I was born, people might have said, well, look at her, she's off in her daydream world all the time. Oh, you know, she must be on the spectrum. You know, so I think Uranus is more about the consciousness around people, and it's an energy. So it's a shocking energy and a surprising energy. The fifth house is more than just our children. You know, obviously there's lots of people that choose not to have children. And, you know, so why would they even have a fifth house? But, you know, the fifth house, I think, is showing what we are birthing, like creative potential. It shows an energy of creation, a point of creation. So yes, it can be a child, but it also shows our hobbies, our interests, our creativity, our pets, and also early romance, as well as pregnancy and birthing, because early romance is, you know, it's a conception. It is the start of something. So the fifth house is about the start of things, the initiation of things, and also very much about creativity. And of course, if Uranus was in the fifth house, there would be a super duper creative energy going on that would be very different. So I just want to say that right from word go. And I would say everyone has got Uranus in their charts, and everyone's got a fifth house in their charts. And given that the sun is always moving, or we appear to be like moving or spinning around, like there will be 1 in 12 charts will have Uranus in the fifth house. So it's not a really rare thing. You know, it's really normal. A 12th of the population will have Uranus in their fifth house. You know, so astrologically, it's really common. Now, if that's true, is every 1 in 12 mums or parents, do they have a child with autism? I think you'll find no, although the rate of autism has gone up. But has that gone up because of an arbitrary planetary placement, or because of other changes that we're going through in our modern world? I mean, what has changed since I was really young to now? There are people, you know, there's toxic overloads, there's changes in pressures, that we're now living in a lot more of a technological and computer aided environment, actually, that really suits some of the characteristics of autism, or how it shows up. And actually, now that we're coming up to the Pluto and Aquarius time, like Uranus is the ruler of, or one of the rulers of, Aquarius. So, you know, Pluto is coming into Aquarius, which is going to mark a 20-year transit. We are coming into a super Uranian time, which is why AI and all things to do with us sitting remotely and connecting, but keeping distance and, you know, firing over the airwaves, that's all very highlighted at the moment. So yeah, given the range of all these explanations, I would say, again, it seems very unlikely that if you're going to have if you've got the fifth house with Uranus in, that you're going to have an autistic child. I'd say that's unlikely. You know, it can happen in any circumstance. Yes, and the last thing of all, and I think I alluded to it before, not everyone agrees that their child was born with autism, and yet the child later starts to display symptoms of autism. And again, there's a whole wide-ranging series of beliefs about this and why this might happen. You know, some say, oh no, if you're autistic, you're born that way, and the mum didn't notice. And there are a whole heap of things that go into that. So yeah, let's have a look. So I hope that all sort of, you know, sets my scene and my agenda here. I'm just wanting to help people. If they've got Uranus in their fifth house, I want them to understand whether this is a potential for them. I really want to reassure them. I also want to really talk about the wonder of how parents who do have autistic children, how that shows up in their charts, and also how some of them are displaying their coping mechanisms, or actually the mechanisms of them thriving in their families. So let's have a look now. So the first chart I'm going to look at is Jon Travolta's, born 18th of Feb 54, 1453 in Englewood, in the US. Now, the first thing I should say, with these charts, they are just based on the times that have been given to astrologers. Obviously I wasn't there, so I can't confirm. But the first thing I'm going to look at is that fifth house. Here's the fifth house. What's the cusp to it? It's in the sign of Scorpio, which is ruled by Pluto and Mars. Some say just Mars, some say Pluto. I'm including both of them in this little investigation. Now, Mars is in the fifth house and Pluto is here. So I'm wondering about the quality of these two planets. Now, Uranus is actually in a very prominent position here. It's in a conjunction with the South Node and also the Ascendant. It's, so this person, Jon, has a very strong Uranus in his chart, and it's in opposition to Chiron and the North Node. And I'll be talking about that later. But first of all, Mars, it's in the fifth, it's in a conjunction with the vertex. So the vertex I think of as a point showing, it's like a mathematical, astronomical point that describes, if the universe was talking to you and saying what your job was, I think that it's like the voice of the universe saying, Jon, I really want you to be involved in this Mars energy here in the fifth house. So that's kind of taking an active role with your child, first of all. Now, Mars is square the moon. It's also square the sun, and it's also square Venus. So his Mars is, there's a lot of, if we take Mars to represent his sun, it could show that there's a disconnect between him and his emotions and identity, and also the feeling of empathy, maybe, or friendliness. It's a little bit, it's not flowing. It may be a bit difficult. However, Jon has also got Mars trine the midheaven, I think showing that this child would have got a lot of support. And it's also, Mars is also in a sextile to Ceres, showing support from mum and father. So, I see that this was challenging, and yet it became, an absolute personal mission to give their son a really great experience. I also noticed that he's got Pluto opposite the sun. So this is the other ruler of the fifth house. Pluto opposite the sun. The sun is your identity. Like the sun, the actual sun in the sky, represents Jon's personality and his identity in some way, and how he expresses his ego. And yet a marker of the fifth, which could represent his son, is in complete opposition and is kind of pulling him away. It's almost stopping him from expressing himself fully, which from the mums that I know, or the parents that I know, they've often felt that they cannot express themselves because their attention is always being put back into their child that needs a lot more support than usual. The other thing, and I've already mentioned this, so Uranus, it's not in the fifth house, but it's conjunct the South Node. So, for some people that believe in the South Node, I'm not sure if I do, but I'm just giving you the idea. There is this feeling that this is a familiar energy, or that he has come into this world with a familiarity with shock, or a familiarity with separation, which Uranus represents. And Jon has come into this world with a familiarity with things just being a bit different. So he's got that resonance already in his chart, and it's right over his ascendant. Though in the 12th house. So I imagine he was quite private about it, would let people know the sort of high level stuff, but it was a very sort of private experience for him, and probably quite shocking, but that Jon has a certain amount of this shock in his life, and that it's in opposition to Chiron. Chiron is showing us our wounds, the things that we can't really heal, and Chiron in a conjunction with the North Node is very much indicating a healing mastery, a life of needing to heal those that he's in relationship with. So it wouldn't surprise me, and I haven't delved too much into his life, but it wouldn't have surprised me if he wasn't just very responsible for his son, but if he was in a relationship with other people that needed a lot of help. Chiron, the descendant, shows that there's a load of people vying for your attention that needs help. And it's because he obviously seems quite strong and possibly a bit detached. Whilst he has a child with autism, his Uranus is not in his fifth house, but it is in a prominent place. And the markers of the fifth house cusp could describe the characteristics of what was going on. And it certainly describes some attitudes that you might have if you were to have an autistic child. So let's have a look at Jenny McCarthy now. She speaks quite openly about her experience of motherhood. Now, her fifth house cusp is ruled by Mercury. So things move quite fast, and she's got Saturn in the fifth house. Now, some people say, that Saturn, somebody could have equally asked me the question, I've got Saturn in the fifth. Does this mean there's going to be a disaster with my children? I would first of all say, well, a lot of that depends on your attitude and your set point, because you can make it that you've got hardworking children. Saturn could show that your children are very dedicated. You could have very depressed children, because Saturn is definitely something that can lower the emotional scale. So you might have children that struggle with life. You might have children that limit you. That might be the way you interpret it. So there's lots of interpretations of the energy of Saturn, which is constriction and bringing you in. It might be that Jenny's child feels constricted and can't freely expand. They are kind of shut in. So again, I would rule against being fatalistic and saying, oh, you've got that sign, therefore this must happen. Anyway, Mercury, the ruler of the fifth house, is in a conjunction with Neptune. Now, Neptune often shows where we are highly creative, but also sometimes confused, almost like you're in cotton wool and you can't quite find your way out. It can sometimes show a difficulty in knowing the right next step, how to move forwards and stuff, and maybe a difficulty interpreting signs and things like that. And this person, her child may well be in a bit of a daydream, almost like you can't access them. However, there are loads of people with this in their own chart, and they may well talk in a creative way. They might be musical, they might be actors, they might be dancers, because Neptune is a great illusionary energy, and you might find that they're both at the same time. So you might find that Jenny, and the way she expresses her fifth house, is that she's deeply motivated and hardworking, given the Saturn there, and that she has an ability to create an illusion, and is very talented at accessing different sides of her creativity. So that could be true for her and how she expresses herself, but also true for her child. The next thing that I notice is Saturn in the fifth is square the moon. And Saturn square the moon can sometimes lead to a feeling of isolation and separation, and that people are hard to reach. Saturn, however, is also trine Uranus and Mars. Now, Uranus and Mars are in a conjunction here. Now, this is interesting. Mars, this aspect doesn't come around too often, maybe once every 2 to 3 years. And Mars, shows our drive, our vitality, how we move forwards. And Uranus is really showing the chasm and the cataclysm of that change and that drive. So I would imagine that Jenny's own energy is slightly jumpy and slightly, she'll be into something, then she'll be off it, and then she'll be into something else. So I would imagine that she has quite an unstable level of vitality, that it changes and switches quite frequently, and it can be quite shocking. And like Mars and Uranus, when they're together, could also show somebody who comes up against violence, or comes up against extreme criticism for being quite free and independent and spontaneous and willful. So I think it probably represents a bit of both with that, but that is also in relation to her child, because it's connecting into Saturn. So it may well be that Jenny has got a lot of backlash from sharing her views about her relationship with her child and how that relationship has impacted her, or the autism has impacted her. Then we've also got Mercury in a square to the vertex. So Mercury again is the ruler. And Mercury's in a square to the vertex. Now, the vertex, if you remember, is one of these points that's saying this is what we want you to focus on. Like, this is what the universe wants you to focus on. So in the square to Mercury, it's like, yes, you need to focus on your child, because Mercury is the ruler of the fifth house. And Mercury is in a trine to Chiron. So I think whatever's happened, it's really awakened something in Jenny in as much. It's so weird talking about people that I've never met, but their charts are a matter of public record. So sorry, Jenny, if you don't find this useful, but Mercury is in a trine to Chiron, showing that Jenny, the individual Jenny, is fascinated by healing and the ideas that we can heal and the conversations about healing. And so that will also inform how she does her relationship with her child. I just want to, and the chart ruler, yes. So her ascendant is in the sign of Aquarius. And if you remember, Uranus is one of the rulers of Aquarius, Saturn's the other. So Saturn's in the 5th and Uranus, is here in that conjunction with Mars. Now, something else about Uranus and Aquarius, before that link was made, between Aquarius and Uranus, in terms of autism, many, many years ago, lots of astrologers said that being queer, being homosexual, being gay, however, whatever terms you want to use. Now it will probably also merge into Uranus and Aquarius and transgenderism. Essentially, it's none of that, but Uranus represents where we're different and where we're individual, and Aquarius also carries that. Wherever Aquarius is in our charts shows where we might be prepared to come out of ourselves a little bit and be a bit different. And so charts that have a very strong Uranus and Aquarius that link into things may well have a slightly higher rate of freedom of expression. And so you feel free to be the person that you really are, that you really consider yourself to be. And so that I think the feeling of liberation and freedom allows people a bit more self-expression, but that's not a given. But in the past, I know when I was first learning astrology, I heard the rumor, watch out for Uranus in the 5th or Uranus in the 7th, because people might have a different idea on dating and relationships that goes against the norm, or that is a little bit unusual. But, we are living in times now where actually everyone is quite unusual. And so at some point, Uranus may well, and Aquarius may lose their potency. Who knows? So I'm just putting that in as another one of these rumors that comes up a lot. So anyway, let's have a look at 3 charts now of people that I actually physically know. I know many others, and I've also looked at their charts. Out of the 3 here, one of them does have a 5th house Uranus. And I have another 6 or 7 charts of parents with autistic children who don't have Uranus in the 5th. So I really don't think it is the rule at all. But like I said at the start, let's have a look at maybe the parents' attitudes on how they might cope and how excited they might be. So this parent here has 4 children on the spectrum, and their Uranus is in the 5th. So they are one of my examples that has a much higher incidence of it. And they do have Uranus in the 5th. But that doesn't mean that is the symbol of it, if you get my meaning. It is just one chart out of many. However, this person's Uranus is in a stellium, so it's in a daisy chain, and that daisy chain starts from the south node, i.e. what we're coming into this world with, this expectation, in a conjunction with Pluto, which is power and control and exploring mastery, and wanting to have influence, connected to the sun. This could be a very powerful person, definitely interested in making a difference. Connected to Uranus, this is somebody who also thinks very differently, could actually be termed neurodivergent themselves. This is somebody highly creative, highly powerful, really interested in lots of different things. Also, it's involving Mercury and Jupiter, which is really thinking outside the box. Yeah, and in fact, Uranus, Mercury and Jupiter, really thinking outside the box. And this is all in the 5th. So this could represent that this person has 4 children who carry this stamp of thinking differently. But actually, this person that I know is a really original thinker. And so you might ask, well, are the children cut in the cloth of their parent? I would say so. It's almost like it's a family theme. This person is a very creative person, very talented person, very excited person, very eclectic person, somebody who values difference and values the joy of life. The fifth house is very much about starting things. And so it's no surprise that this person has a lot of children by modern day standards. They are kind of shocking with the amount of children that they have in modern day standards. And they are very creative with them. So I love that. And that really describes some of the attitudes that this parent has. This parent is not creating them. However, and I realize when I say creating them as if, them, I don't mean to other anyone. This is the difficulty with the languaging, isn't it? It's almost like this person is creating a space that is good for people to be themselves. And so any babies that want to be born into a really accepting family, who they're going to have a great support system, they're going to crowd to that person. And they're going to be saying, yeah, I want to come through. I think we get matched to the right parents for the kind of trauma and experience we might want to go through. So, their Uranus is also in a grand trine to the ascendant and to the midheaven, and Sarah's is there. Sarah's the mothering, the parent sort of archetype, very much on the midheaven. This person's a very active parent. And so it's a grand trine. So in actual fact, becoming a parent to these children was a deep honor. So I love that. And I've spelled Aquarius wrong there, but their moon is also in Aquarius. So, given that Uranus is one of the rulers of Aquarius, and then you've got the moon there, this is like a double whammy of Uranian energy. I mean, this person is highly eclectic and very unusual, has very unusual experience, and they are awesome. And a bit chaotic too, as you'd imagine, with all that creative energy and appetite. So, when you look at this, it's really a blessing. Now, obviously, there is this hard square, so there will be some hard work. Between Mars and Pallas Athena, there are some very hard things to deal with, and it will involve force and like each other's will and how they navigate that. And that does feed into the sun at 29 degrees. Interesting, the sun's at 29 degrees, the anuretic degree, which is quite unstable. So there is a lot of friction there as well. But all in all, what a blessing. And Chiron here as well, the absolute desire to understand health and healing and being able to support people that might have a healing issue. It's almost like the children have come in to actually show the parent how they can heal themselves too. So really interesting case study. Next one then. This is a parent with two children on the autistic spectrum. Now, they don't have such a strong Uranus theme. It's more, I would say, more of a Pluto Scorpio theme. So this person's born with the moon in Scorpio in a conjunction with the vertex in the fifth house. So this person, their love as a parent is very Scorpio. It's very private. It's very deep, very immutable, very, very loyal to the children. And the vertex is saying, this is your job to be the mum here. And they're born at the time of the full moon. And the sun is in a conjunction with Mars and also Ceres. So this is definitely a mum that wants to be a mum. Oh, sorry, I revealed it's a mum. It is a mum. And Mars is there. The mothering experience does have some real deep discord, and it's difficult. And being born at the full moon is quite challenging. And it too is a gift, seeing as loads of people. I don't want to have loads of people in the chat going, "Oh my God, I'm born at the time of the full moon. How could you?" So anyway, this is a person who has quite a lot of difficulty around the energies, and it's almost as if the energies are pulling this person apart quite regularly. Now, the ruler of the fifth is actually, in fact, I didn't even write it here, but the ruler of the fifth is actually Venus. Now, I wish I had written it because it's worth mentioning. Venus is in a conjunction with Saturn and Chiron. I did put it there actually. So Venus, you know, how you love and who you love, you know, she is loving people who are quite locked in and quite restricted and quite contracted, and also who have healing issues. So this is somebody who has lots of love and is attracting people with who are almost a little bit locked in and need extra healing. And that is in a trine to her Neptune and South Node. Again, if you believe in past lives, Neptune and the South Node is very much bringing in this idea of like born into this kind of confusion as to where the boundaries begin and end. Like, where does her boundary start and where does her responsibility start and where does it end? It's very difficult. And so this person has been born into this feeling of that they have endless energy to expend to create a relationship with people that are not as joyous and open and expanded as they are. So that is quite challenging, although there are many ways that we can express this in a really positive way as well. You know, Neptune and South Node, you've come in with poetry and this understanding of spirituality. And, you know, with Venus in a conjunction with Saturn, it can also be read as you're able to manifest your creativity and manifest creativity around healing. So, you know, everything can be read two ways, probably more than that actually, but you know, there are two sides to a coin. You can look at the aspect in a negative way or very much in a positive way. Now, Uranus is also conjunct Pluto. So Uranus, the big planet that was the topic of this discussion, it's in a very, very tight conjunction with Pluto. And her moon in Scorpio is ruled by Pluto. So it's like there is a bit of a shared fifth theme here. So it does feel like, you know, that's got something to do with it as well. So as you can see, Uranus is in a strong position, but it's not in the fifth. So you can't really define it in that way. Last of all, then, this is a parent with one child with Asperger's. Now, here, their chart ruler is Mercury. The ruler of the fifth is just in Capricorn, so it's Saturn. Again, I haven't written that. I don't know why I didn't write that down. Anyway, their Saturn is in a conjunction with Neptune, which isn't very easy to process, but it can also be when it's beautifully expressed. And I know this person does express this energy very beautifully. It's a very creative and beautiful soul who manages beauty and good experiences and who's absolutely dedicated to breaking down boundaries, really, and creating the means to do that. So that's very, very strong. Now they've got Uranus in a conjunction with Juno. Now Juno shows what we're committed to, what we're absolutely committed to. It's like a higher love, and you know, Uranus is in a conjunction with Juno in the sign of Cancer, which is all about motherhood and parenting, and it's in the 10th house. So it's like this person has made being the parent of an autistic child absolutely so prominent in their life that it almost becomes a striving, and it's also connected into the vertex. It becomes a career. It could become a job. So this, again, very much like the person two below. In fact, all three of them have made a job out of being a parent, out of, you know, a parent with an autistic child or more autistic children. Now, Mars and Pluto and Ceres and the moon are in a conjunction. This is very, very strong. So yeah, this is a very, very, very strong sort of energy. Mars and Pluto together, and Ceres about motherhood and parenting, and the moon. It's like there's a lot of softness and a need to be really tough. Pluto and Mars together is a very, very strong energy, really showing resiliency. So this is somebody who has almost had to fight for the rights of their children, and it would have felt quite isolating. were it not for the fact that this person appears to be very good at getting support systems around them. So Jupiter here at the top of the chart, and then it connecting into the Saturn and Neptune. This person, very much like the person two charts ago, they use creativity as a support system. So yeah, there are my 3 actual mums or dads, because they weren't all mums, I can promise you that. And like I said right at the start, I was very nervous about answering this question. I don't know if I have answered. Well, I have answered it. Yeah. So the question was, let me just bring it up or read it. Where is it? The question was, crikey, it's quite a long presentation. Is it true that you'll have autistic children with a 5th house Uranus? Basically, no. Absolutely not. It could be true, but it's probably not. And, for all those reasons I said at the start, there are gradations, there's a spectrum that people talk about. When does it happen, at birth or slightly in? How do you relate to a diagnosis? Is it better for you to have a diagnosis or not for you to have a diagnosis? How do you choose to language the whole thing? And what are your attitudes, and how do you manage your life? I mean, each of these parents I've looked at have it has become their life. Their children have necessitated that they are part of their parents' lives in a much bigger way. And they've all had their different ways of coping. So in answer to this question, I would say if you've got 5th house in Uranus, it's not a given. And if you are the mother or father of a child with autism, this may have shown you that it wasn't necessarily planned that way. However, you can see almost like how somebody is as a parent. You can see their techniques and what it's bringing to them, possibly what it's taking from them. I don't think anything is ever a curse, and I don't think there are true blessings. Everything is a balance at some level, and it's a very rich tapestry. And I realize I'm using so many different metaphors now, so I'm just going to sign off. But I hope that was useful for those of you that are inquiring about it and are curious. Please, whenever you're learning about astrology, I'm so wary of these hard and fast rules that people share, because when you put some real deep down, like some deep dives into them, they're rarely true, if ever. It does, I think, astrology a huge disservice. So use astrology as a tool. Don't use it as a stick to beat yourself with. That's my final word. So anyway, lots of love to you wherever you are in the world. Hope this has been useful, and please do check out another video another time. Take care. Bye for now.